Okay, so as just to introduce myself, my name is Vicki Score, and as Matthew said, I'm Director of University of Leicester Archaeological Services. But the project I'm actually going to be looking at today was back when I was just a digger with ULAS. And it's actually 20 years ago that the first coins were found, which makes me feel quite old. But the photo you can see there is me on this site 20 years ago, when we had some rather spectacular British weather to contend with. But despite that, it's this project that has really made me want to make my career in archaeology, and also got me interested in community archaeology, as well as having some spectacular finds. So today I'm going to be talking about the discovery and excavation of the Hallaton Treasure. We're going to look at the excavations themselves, and I'm going to apologise now for the quality of some of the photos. This is way back before digital cameras were around, so many of these photos have been converted from slides, and that really does make me feel quite old. I'm then going to look at some of the artefacts that were found there, so the coins, the helmets and the animal bones. And then I'm going to look at what the site might be and its landscape context. And then just to say that all of these objects are in display in Harbour Museum, which I think is open now if you book. And the museum is also going to be putting on some more events based around the 20-year anniversary of this, including a question and answer session with some of the original people involved. So if you find this interesting, you might want to watch out for that later in the year. Okay, just for those of you who are not quite sure where Hallaton is, we're just southwest of Leicester, so you can see Leicester up there in the sort of top left area, and the red dot there is roughly where Hallaton village is. So this site generated a huge amount of publicity when it was announced, when we had the press release in 2003. As you can see from the assorted headlines, I'm pretty sure there's not that many archaeologists who can claim that their site made it into Hello magazine next to Russell Crowe's wedding. But although it was the treasure, the thousands of gold and silver coins and artifacts that initially captured the public imagination, the real value of the finds in this site is that although it was found by metal detecting, the artifacts were recovered using controlled excavation techniques. And this means that the coins and the artifacts were uncovered in their original context, which has just enabled us to understand what, how, and with a little bit of imagination, why these coins and objects were buried on a hilltop in rural Leicestershire. We have an entire site here that's relatively undisturbed, and the excavations have helped us to build up a story of a sacred site, artifact deposition, ritual and animal sacrifice. So the story of this site began, as I said, some 20 years ago with the Hallaton Fieldwork Group, who were one of Leicestershire's many community groups. And they were out field walking a fairly ordinary field, and you can see it here, nothing particularly spectacular about it. They started finding a few bits of Iron Age and Roman pottery, fairly standard stuff for Leicestershire. And the story might well have ended there, except for this person here, Ken Wallace. He was interested in some aspects of the site, specifically some of the animal bone that he was finding, and he went back with his metal detector. And this is really where the extraordinary story of this site starts, because Ken found lots of silver coins, mostly Iron Age, a few Roman, dating to the first half of the 1st century AD. And just to emphasise, this is a really special find. Iron Age coins are fairly rare, and luckily Ken knew this, reported it to Pete Liddell and the local museum. Because of the rarity and the potential threat from illegal metal detecting once word got out, Historic England, or English Heritage as they were then, agreed to fund some evaluations, and in 2001 ULAS began work on the site with the help of the local group. And here's some members of the local group in action. throughout the 5 years this project has been running, we would have been lost without their help. Not only did they find and report the site, but nearly all of the field work has been carried out with them under the supervision of ULAS, and they've also been involved in the post-excavation. And it's thanks to these people as well that the project stayed quiet and protected. They kept quiet about this amazing discovery while we were digging it. Not easy in a small village where everyone can see that you're digging large holes on a hilltop. But they also monitored the site regularly to make sure it stayed as undisturbed as possible. Okay, so the first part of the evaluation was a geophysical survey, and this produced a number of strong features. You can see there the black lines on that slide represent ditches. And just to highlight what we've got, there's a nice large boundary ditch there shown in red. This ditch actually continues. We've done further work and it actually continues all the way down to the south of the site. Oops. Again, we've got quite a few enclosures that you can see in blue around there, and then we've also got these yellow circles, which are probably Iron Age roundhouses. However, I just want to bring your attention down to the bottom right where there's a green circle, because we think that that one is probably an earlier feature, a Bronze Age round barrow perhaps. We dug some small trial trenches around this area, and we found plenty of features. We found these ditches, however they were all Roman, mostly dating to the 2nd and 4th century, so not really contemporary with the coins. And as you can see, if I highlight this area here, this is where the coins were found. And there's no features where the coins were coming up. Nothing turned up on the geophysical survey apart from ridge and furrow. However, luckily for us, Ken hadn't just wandered up and down the field pulling up coins. Once he realised what he had found, he set out grids across the field and plotted every coin he found to within a metre. And this is one of his grids. And I think this is probably the closest I'll ever get to a genuine treasure map. The top part should have a big X on it, as you can see, where that's most of the coins were being found. And we decided to put a small trench right on top of that grid. And this is literally me on the first day on site, and Ken lurking in the background. And to be honest, I really didn't think we were going to find much. We're just off the top of a ridge. The topsoil is very shallow. You can see there it's no more than around 30 centimetres. And the geophysical survey just didn't show anything. And the likelihood was that Ken had found a ploughed out hoard. And the most we'd find would be a few more coins and probably the ploughed out bases. It was a bit of a shock, therefore, when the first hoard appeared. This one here, closely followed by another one, and then a third. And these are mainly silver coins. The green that you can see is from the copper that's within the metal that's leached out into the soil. And there's another one. And just want to point out, I really love these photos because that's my hand. And most archaeologists just never get the chance to handle Iron Age coins like this. By the end of the day, oops, we ended up with 6 coin hoards across the site. Amazingly, even though these hoards were only just beneath the plough soil, they all seemed fairly intact. Medieval furrows across the site had mostly missed them. They weren't in pits as such, but some appeared to retain the shape of the container they put in. If you can see the slide on the bottom right there, you can see the swirl of the coins, and it's probably been in some kind of bag, and the bag has rotted away and just left the coins in the shape of the bag. We were lucky in that we were able to lift the coins in small blocks. So you can see here on the left the kind of blocks we lifted, and they were sent back to the British Museum so they could excavate them there. Okay, so this is our trench. Once we found the coins, we widened the trench out to see if we got features associated with it. And you can see the coins marked at the top left there. We've got a ditch running north-south across the area with an entranceway on the east side. The coins are clustered on the north side of the entranceway, just in there. And we ended up with a total of 13 hoards. Now, the entranceway itself is quite interesting. There's an angled pit in the centre of it, as you can see, and the terminals appear to kink in. And it's almost if to guide you through the southern side of it and then out the northern half. The central feature in the entranceway that you can see there was quite shallow, but we did find the skeleton of a small dog here. And there he is. This is the dog. We think we've got two dogs here. We think this dog was actually two features. The skeleton of the dog is probably complete. The reason you can't see the back end of it is because there was a land drain running right the way through the middle of it. But I think you can see he's quite strangely positioned, and we think this is probably some kind of a ritual burial and possibly a sacrifice. I think there's probably a good possibility that there was a palisade or some kind of fence in the ditch. You can see here the entrance and the southern terminal being excavated. We're looking south now down the trench, and you can see that the enclosure ditch on the left-hand side there is very steep-sided. We didn't have any evidence for post holes, but given the profile, I think it's possible there was a fence within this. And at this stage, it's not clear whether this is an enclosure right the way around the hilltop. It would be about 80 to 100 metres wide, or whether it was merely a screen that just acted to block the area off. And so this is an interpretation done by Harbour Museum of what it might have looked like if it had this palisade, looking through the entranceway. And I said at this stage, it's not quite clear whether this was a screen all the way round or just a little bit in the front to screen it off. Okay, so more metal detecting by Ken found what appeared to be another two coin hoards in a small pit on the eastern side of the ditch, and quite a few lumps of corroded iron. And I think you can see from this just how corroded this metalwork is. We had absolutely no idea what this was until we took several of the fragments back, and one piece got identified as the ear of a Roman cavalry helmet, and you can see it here just on the top there. And as I said, it was so badly corroded, we realised that we were really going to struggle to dig this out. So we quickly got Graham Morgan from the University Conservator involved, and the entire block, the entire area of that metalwork was lifted and sent to the British Museum to be excavated. And you'll see some of the results from that later. So despite all of these discoveries from the first season, we still had an awful lot of unanswered questions, as you can imagine. One of the main ones was about the ditch. Was it a ritual enclosure? And if so, were the coins outside or inside? So we were lucky enough to get some more funding from the British Museum and the BBC. And in 2003, we went back and opened up a larger area around the original trench. And this is an aerial shot of the site. So the original trench you saw with the features in is under the big spoil heap in the middle. And I think you can see the ridge and furrow quite clearly on this running across the site. So the Iron Age ditch continues to the north, and is quite difficult to see if I put that line on there, and also to the south. So you can see them there. And you can also see that they're not straight, they're curving round, and actually it's less of a curve and more of a definite geometric shape. And we also excavated out to the east of the site at the request of the local group, because this was where they'd found some animal bones and they wanted to know what's going on. So we excavated out in this area here. So we originally thought the animal bones covered just a small area, but when we opened it up, we actually uncovered a large area, absolutely packed with animal bone. Pretty much everything you can see in that slide has animal bone in it. This is some of the bone. This is the sort of thing we were coming up with. And as you can see, at least some of it is articulated. It's still complete burials rather than just fragments of bone. It turned out that this bone is nearly all pig, and nearly all of the animals we looked at in here are less than a year old. And we quickly realised that these burials were in fact part of the ritual site itself. So beneath the initial layer of bone, we had a number of pits cut into the natural, containing partially articulated animal bones, and you can see some of them here. So we've got a skull in the front, but then we've got some leg bones folded up at the back. And we're not looking at whole skeletons here like the dog in the entranceway, but some of the bones do appear to be deliberately placed portions of animals, perhaps as part of a ritual, so maybe some kind of offering to the gods. And then the upper deposits that you saw earlier, which were spread out over the top, a lot more fragmented and may represent some kind of ritual feasting. And I'll come back and look at that a bit later. We went back to the site the following Easter in 2004 to open up some small hand-dug trenches. Specifically, we wanted to target this animal bone pit that you can see in the foreground that sat on top of the ditch. So this is the trench we opened, and you can tell it's Easter in Britain by the weather. We dug a section through the enclosure ditch, and the only reason we dug in this area was to try and drain the water off the pit we were trying to dig. And we chose this particular section of the ditch for no other reason than it had a land drain in it, so it was already disturbed. And as we were digging it, around halfway down, we started to pick up some more coins, lots of coins, around 100 in the end. And then we found the first of our silver artifacts. And this is it. This is the first object we found. It appears to be some kind of decorative piece, perhaps for horse harness, and it's broken, as you can see, but it's been re-pierced around the edge so that it can be used again, even though it's damaged. Perhaps it had some kind of sentimental value, or maybe it was an heirloom and people wanted to keep on using it despite the damage on it. And then just against the side of the ditch, we found this strange object, and this was actually sat vertically right against the side. And I know it looks a bit like a lawn edger, but in fact what it is it's a silver ingot. And then I think this just shows just how lucky we were with this site. You can see the land drain that I mentioned before, and this was practically sat right on top of these items. You can even see a spade mark on the edge of the bowl there. Now that's not an old mark, so that was potentially made by whoever dug out the trench for the land drain. And you can also see here how these objects appear to have been placed right on the edges up, within the trench, within the ditch, rather than just dropped into the bottom. So this is the silver bowl. And this is pretty much unique for this period in Britain. Unfortunately, nothing inside it but mud. And this is the other ingot. This is from the base of a crucible and is made from, partially made at least, from melted down silver coins. If you look at the bottom, you might be able to see, let me just see if I can move my mouse across to show you that. So these areas here, these are actually bits of coins. that have been melted down into the crucible. Okay, so this is the final site plan of the area. You can see there we've got the ditch running north-south with the the kink to the northwest and the southwest. You've got the entranceway on the east, a load of animal bone out also on the east, and then the helmet area and where the silver artifacts came from. And we seem to be looking at a large open air site dating around to the first half of the 1st century AD. Along with ritual deposition of coin hoards and other artifacts, alongside ritual treatment of animals and feasting. We've got no evidence for a building, and in fact, no evidence for anything inside the ritual area. However, that doesn't mean to say there couldn't be natural features such as stones or trees in there. And I think this clearly shows the entranceway when I was talking about the terminals and how they kinked to form almost like a turnstile effect with an in and an out. And this would be an easy way to control access in and out of the sacred area. I think it's quite interesting that all of the coins are in the out bit. It makes you wonder if people were sent in but then weren't allowed to leave until they'd deposited their coins. Okay, so to take a quick look at some of the dating we've got for the site. There's some evidence that the site was used earlier. I mentioned the geophysics and that possible Bronze Age barrow. So it may well be that this site was utilised in the Bronze Age for burials. And it's not unusual for ritual sites to be placed over earlier ceremonial areas. And that little fragment you can see there on the top left is actually a fragment of a Bronze Age spear that we found on the site. There's an early hoard of gold coins that date to the first half of the 1st century BC. This was from the area around the animal bones, and we think they may have been disturbed when the animal bones pits were dug. The main depositions, however, happen around the first half of the 1st century AD. I'll talk a bit more about the dating of the coins in a bit, but the coins with the silver ingots and other objects appear to be a bit earlier because they're uninscribed. But the main bulk of them are inscribed and date to sort of mid-1st century AD. We've also got some radiocarbon dates from the animal bones, which gives us a range of 50 BC to 80 AD, which ties in nicely with the dating for the coins. We have also got later Roman archaeology on the site, as I mentioned before, when we're looking at the geophysical survey. And what's interesting is the Roman archaeology is all around the area, but it's not actually on the Iron Age shrine itself. It seems to completely avoid it. And given that this is sat on the prime location on the ridge top, I think that's quite significant. We've also got some suggestions of ritual activity in the Roman period. We've got a few, I'll turn over, yeah, there we go. That little gold fragment is part of a bracelet, and that was buried in a 4th century hoard with some Roman coins, just in where the animal bone pits were. And then we also found this strange object, the copper object on the left is the one from Hallaton, that we weren't sure what it was, but it looks very similar to the ritual scepter handles found in Wombre Temple down south, and we suspect it's something very similar. So there is later Roman ritual activity going on, but we just don't know where it is, and it certainly wasn't on top of where the Iron Age shrine was. Okay, so I'm going to move on and look at some of the objects in a bit more detail now, starting with the coins. We've got more than 5,000 gold and silver coins. I think that number is out of date now. I think they found a few more in the helmet block, but certainly more than 5,000, and a significant number, well over 3,000, actually came from stratified contexts. They're mostly ancient British coins, but we've also got a number of Roman denarii, and we've also got, interestingly, quite a few gold-plated staters, which are contemporary ancient forgeries. You know, it's not just modern period where people like to forge coins. We've got quite a few lead and silver coins that have been coated with gold plate. But that number is quite significant, because not only did this more than double the number of coins of this type that we already knew about, but it made quite a few types that were once considered quite rare and exciting, somewhat ordinary. I once had a chat with a specialist in Iron Age coins, a coin collector, who told me that I'd ruined some of his best examples by flooding the market with a lot more. So there are also a number of unusual new pieces from the site as well. So here you can see we've got the early deposits suggestive of hoarding in the late 1st century BC. The gold coins, these are the ones you can see across the bottom, that are quite different to the later silver coins. We've then got the deposits in the ditch fill with all those silver objects that you saw earlier, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. We've got 13 hoards and 2 hoards in with the helmet deposits dating to around about the 40s and 50s. And then we've got deposits and losses associated with continued activity into the Roman period. The discovery of so many hoards together is really important. As well as being able to excavate them in the labs, this has allowed us to make some quite detailed numismatic comparisons, and also to say something about the Iron Age society that they represent. So, as I said before, the Iron Age coins are predominantly attributed to the tribe which dominated this part of the East Midlands and Lincolnshire, the Coriotorve. You can see in purple there, and the red dot is roughly where Hallaton is. And this site seems to have been quite an important religious or ritual centre for them. Generally, in the in the Iron Age in this area, we seem to see settlements supporting several family groups within a larger agricultural landscape, and this is often characterised by groups of roundhouses, as you saw in the geophysical survey, sometimes enclosed. At this time, we're also seeing increased Roman influence on Britain following the various invasions by Julius Caesar, and also seeing some import of Roman objects. Now, not a great deal is known about the Coriotorve, and most of what we do know does come from their coinage. And you can see here that the inscriptions on here we think are the names of their leaders. And you can see quite clearly that we've got some very distinct names. So you can see here Vet, Lataisen, Aun, Velissus and Isuprasu. And these are probably some of the first names of people that we actually know in this area. What's interesting is all of these coins appear together in the same hoards. And this has led to the idea that rather than these being successive rulers, one after the other, of a large area, that actually what we're looking at is smaller groups, each with their own leader, within the Coriotorve area, and all of them coming together to meet at Hallaton as a larger community. And the chart at the bottom there is a suggestion of how each of these tribes may have coexisted within the region and overlapped with each other. In terms of how the coins were made, they were struck. So the metal was poured into these pellet moulds to produce a blank, and then the blank was placed within the dies and hammered. And this creates a quite distinct dish shape, and you can see that picture at the bottom, how the coins are slightly dished because of how they've been struck. I think it also makes you realise just how talented the die makers were. You can see the scale there, the 1p piece, just how tiny some of these little coins are, but still incredibly detailed. But also, just because these coins were inscribed doesn't mean that people could actually read them. You can see that although they're using the Latin alphabet for inscriptions, they don't really understand them, and we end up with quite a few nonsense words where they've copied the letters, but they've just turned into squiggles and patterns. And you can see that along the bottom, where you know, these would originally have been inscriptions that the person who's copied them doesn't realise that they're letters, and it's turned into a series of patterns. Although it seems important to have had an inscription, it doesn't necessarily have to have made much sense to the people. And this just shows how Iron Age coins have evolved. So on the left there, you've got the Philip II of Macedonia coin, which is often considered to be the original coin that many others derive from and gets copied. And as it gets copied, it gets more and more abstract. So you can see that that's a bit less clear. And then by the time we get to our Iron Age coins, you can see in the top one there that though we've still got like the laurel wreath and the eyebrows and maybe an ear and a couple of eyes, they've become much more of a pattern. And the same at the bottom, where the chariot wheels have turned into abstract patterns, and the whip has turned into three tails on the horse. And then getting even more obscure, and by the time you get to the end, you can see the laurel wreath there has just turned into a complete pattern with very little else on. And then a few more at the bottom, where you can see how the horse there has just become a complete abstract design. And it's a little bit like Chinese whispers. The original Iron Age coins bear little resemblance to the original, but when you look at them, you can see how they've evolved. We've also got over 300 Roman coins that were found on the site, including one of the oldest Roman coins found in Britain, dating to 211 BC. This is quite interesting, as this basically had been buried was 250 years old when it got buried. Did this and the other early coins arrive in the area before the Roman invasion, or were they perhaps from the purse of some invading soldier that came across and got to Hallaton through trade and diplomacy? And the answer is we just don't know. What's also interesting is that many of the early Roman Republican coins are in mint condition. So you can see the one down the bottom, it's in very good condition. And it makes you wonder whether perhaps these were kept specially for special occasions to be buried. If they're in use, you expect them to become very worn. So the fact that so many of them are in good condition sort of suggests that they weren't in general circulation. Okay, moving on now to look at the helmet. So this is Marilyn from the British Museum on the right, who had the painstaking job of excavating and conserving the helmet at the start. And this is what it looked like when she got it. The helmet was placed upside down in the pit along with a large group of coins, over 100. And when we lifted it and turned it upside down. So essentially you're looking at the bottom of the pit. And for those of you who've got sharp eyes, yes, that is a Sainsbury's bag that it's covered in. We ran out of the fabric that we were using to cover it, and we repurposed a Sainsbury's bag for the purpose. So, as I said before, the helmet was actually placed upside down in the pit, along with a large group of coins, around 1,000 of them. The core of the helmet is iron, and then it's covered with a silver gilt, and the iron has now mostly corroded, leaving only small areas of the gilded surface still surviving, which is why it just looked like a lot of rust when we first excavated. It's consistent with early Imperial Roman helmet types, believed to have been intended for cavalrymen, and dates to the first half of the 1st century AD. We're very lucky because we've got the coins. This dates it very nicely for us. The helmet has now been put back together and is in Harbour Museum, and this is what it looks like now. And I think you can all agree that the British Museum conservators have done a great job from the pile of rusted metal that we first uncovered on site. You can see that it's really quite highly decorated. We've got a bust on the front, and there's also traces of a laurel wreath that you might just be able to see along the side. However, it's not just as straightforward as finding a nice Roman helmet, as we seem to have multiple cheek pieces along with it, 6, possibly 7, as well as packets of silver foil. Here are 2 of the cheek pieces. These seem to be a pair, and you can see just how fragmented some of this stuff actually is. We don't really know why we have multiple cheek pieces. Were they interchangeable? They're obviously highly decorated, so we wondered whether perhaps you might have different cheek pieces for different occasions, but I don't think this is likely. Were they perhaps stolen from a Roman workshop used to repair or mend helmets? The small packet of silver foil I mentioned looks like it's the same stuff that was used to cover the cheek pieces, so that's a possibility. And again, another very fragmented bits of cheek pieces. Some of these are only really visible by X-ray. You can see the images on the right-hand side, and then if I put the arrow on there, we've got a bearded figure, possibly an Assyrian. If I just take the mouse and just show you some, get it on. Okay, maybe I can't. Okay, you'll have to use your imagination for that. But basically, if you look where the arrow is pointing, you can just see his nose curving round in there. And then on the one below, we've got a cornucopia, or a horn of plenty, down the side, which is a bit clearer. And then a helmet, you can see that with cheek pieces there, and also a shield. So these are quite highly decorated pieces. Okay, so this is the best preserved cheek piece. This is it in its before it was fully excavated out. And what's interesting with the helmet is that there was animal bone placed in with it, and it seems almost as if the animal bone was there originally, had been disturbed, but then they put it back in with the helmet as part of the ritual deposit. The image we've got here, there he is. It's a mounted man in armour, his right arm outstretched, and a winged victory behind him. And then underneath, we've got another figure. There he is. And it looks like some kind of barbarian, possibly being trampled over by the Roman victory. And this seems to be some kind of Roman image of victory. And there's also a helmet down at the bottom there as well. The identity of the figure is quite unclear. It seems very likely that the rider is going to be an emperor. However, the features aren't sufficiently well defined to identify a specific individual, which emperor it is. Fragments of helmets have been found elsewhere in the region. So on the top left there, you can see a cheek piece from just down the road in Leicester. However, the closest parallels we think for this come from the continent, where helmets are often buried in pits or else thrown in rivers. In particular, the Xanten cavalry helmet on the right-hand side there has a laurel wreath similar to the Hallaton helmet, and also a bust on the front. So the big question is just what was this helmet doing buried on a native Leicestershire ritual site? Bear in mind, this is a very definite Roman object, and the Hallaton shrine, everything else about it says it's a native British site. It's hard to know for sure, but there are a number of possibilities. It could possibly have belonged to a Briton who'd gone abroad, perhaps to serve in the Roman army, and brought the helmet back to Hallaton with him. It could have been robbed, from the Romans. You know, this is around the time of the invasion. If the Romans were marching through the area, it could have been stolen from them. But I think perhaps the most likely explanation for this is that it was some kind of Roman diplomatic gift. You know, if they're coming through the area, they might want to sort of keep in with the locals, and this may have been a way of giving them a gift to prominent, potentially friendly locals. Okay, moving on to the ditch deposits that we looked at earlier. You saw these earlier when they were found. They are quite mysterious. It's a very strange collection of objects. They were obviously deliberately placed at certain places within the ditch. There are also some of the earliest deposits on the site. The coins found with them are uninscribed, so they date from around AD 1 to 30. So a little bit earlier than the main coins and the helmet deposits we've just been looking at. It includes a broken decorative mount, and you can see here quite clearly that although it's broken, they have put extra holes in around the edge so it can be reused. As I said before, you know, I suspect the reason for this might be because this was obviously of some significance, and the fact that it was broken didn't stop them from still wanting to be able to use it. We've got the two different ingots, and these two blue glass objects down the bottom that we actually think are glass eyes from an idol or a statue that was possibly made of wood, and as therefore the wood has disintegrated and just left the eyes there. And also the rather fabulous silver bowl that you can see on the top left there. So the silver bowl has been analysed by an expert silversmith who had a go at recreating it at Goldsmiths Hall in London. And he is pretty convinced that the methods used to make the bowl are practically the same as we would use today, and that the tools as well would be very similar. He's looked at the tool marks on it, and you can see this is the process he used to recreate it. And this is the end result. The Hallaton bowl is obviously the one on the right, but he was quite happy that you know, this was how they made it. Okay, so moving away from objects and onto the animal bones, and despite not being quite as shiny, I think these are some of the most interesting finds from the site. They've been studied by Jennifer Browning in ULAS, and the first point to make about them is the animal remains are extremely unusual in the context of Iron Age Britain. So the graph you can see there shows a standard assemblage from Leicestershire. On most domestic sites, sheep and cattle are common, with pig being the third most frequently found animal. Dogs and horses are a bit rarer, and settlements tend to contain a good mixture of different species with different types of bone and ages, with clear evidence of butchery. Now this is Hallaton, and as you can see, the animal bones from this site are very, very different. They come from a particular species, primarily pigs and dogs, and virtually all of the other species that we did find on site are residual, that is, they got there accidentally. And it's fairly clear that this is not a standard domestic assemblage. So here's the dog that you saw before. We actually have evidence for three buried dogs on site. The most complete is this one that you've seen before, and which was buried in the entranceway in the ditch. You can see they're circled by the red circle. And as I mentioned before, the feature had been recut, and there'd been an earlier dog buried there. It looks as if the dog has been carefully posed. You can see these legs are pulled right back under him and possibly tied, and the head is also angled backwards. And interestingly, the dog's head has been posed to look directly towards the coin hoards. We also found traces of a third dog in the boundary ditch, close to the silver objects, but no dog bones were found anywhere else on the site. So what can the bones tell us about the dogs? They are all adult. They're quite large dogs, sort of greyhound height, but definitely quite stocky. Perhaps they are guard dogs, as the head, as I mentioned, was pointing towards the coins, so perhaps they're protecting the coins. Interestingly as well, they're all very elderly dogs, and the suggestion is that this was an honour conferred on dogs that have been faithful hunters and companions during their lifetime, that they were allowed to continue their service after they were dead. Dogs do feature quite often in Iron Age ritual deposits. They seem to have a symbolic significance over and above their day-to-day uses. And they shared a special relationship with humans, and it may be that the dogs were placed there as guardians, perhaps keeping out unwanted visitors while at the same time welcoming those who were allowed access into the site. The fact that we've got two different animals buried in the entranceway might indicate that the protection afforded by the dogs had run out and needed to be renewed with a new sacrifice. Perhaps something had happened that made them want to reconsecrate the ground. Perhaps we've got different phases of the site going on. And then the second group of animal bones were mainly recovered from the large group of pits to the east of the entranceway. And about 99% of this bone was identified as pig. Now, they were nearly all very young, mostly less than a year old. Usually pigs are killed for their meat during their second and third year when they have the most meat on them. But here we have pigs killed before they've reached their full size. So this represents an economic to the community. The pig bones on site, we excavated at least 82 individual pigs, but we only excavated about a quarter of the area. So we're looking at several hundred pigs buried up there in this area. They seem to be buried over a number of years from AD 30 onwards, and all parts of the body were represented, suggesting that the pigs were brought as whole animals onto the site and then divided up and put into the pits. Now, it's likely that Iron Age pigs were similar to those of wild boar, and these mate in the autumn and give birth in the spring. And as our pigs were mostly between 7 and 11 months when they were killed, this suggests that they were killed in the autumn or winter months. So if we're looking at a ritual, we're probably looking at something happening in autumn and winter. Okay, looking at the bones, there was one trend that was particularly striking. So this chart shows the number of left and right of each type of bone. And you can see that across the board, it's mostly equal, apart from the area highlighted in red. And this shows that there are far fewer bones of the lower right front leg than left legs. And this is a consistent pattern in every feature that we examined. For some reason, the right front leg has been removed. What they're doing with them is anybody's guess. Of course, we haven't excavated all of the pits, so it might be that somewhere on site there is a pit crammed full of lower right front legs. There are other suggestions of this type of deliberate selection of limbs. So places like Durrington Moors, there's a site on the Isle of Skye and also at Llangors in Wales. But we really don't know the reason for this. But something strange is definitely going on. Whether the right front leg was considered significant for some reason or perhaps not significant, and that's why it's been removed. We really don't know. So we have two types of animal bone deposits. We have essentially joints of pork placed in pits. Well, pork was often considered the food of the gods, so this is likely to be a sacrifice, portions of meat offered to the gods. The mass of bones over the top appears to be a midden of food waste, maybe the remains of a huge feast. Butchery marks and burnt bone is quite rare, but this doesn't necessarily mean anything because an expert butcher wouldn't have many marks on the bone because they'd know where best to muscles and sinews. Another point to consider is that the carcasses were cooked well enough, butchery may not have been required to separate the joints. It would have just fallen apart in your hands. We've also got this rather nice Celtic tankard handle, and in the centre there, the reconstruction of what the tankard itself would have looked like. And again, to suggest feasting, this was a big cup that you could have passed around a large group of people. So you can perhaps imagine a situation where family groups of people would bring a pig to the celebration, offered up a joint of meat to the gods, and then feasted on the rest. And then, of course, we have the missing forelegs. So just what were they doing with them? Okay, so what exactly was the purpose of the Hallaton site? It appears to be an open-air ritual meeting place. It sits in a very prominent position in the landscape. It's got an entrance guarded by ritually bound dogs and with deliberately placed deposits of coins and objects. We've got strong evidence for feasting and the offering of specific types of animal, as well as a distinct lack of domestic refuse. So we've got virtually no pottery or anything like cereal grains on the site. So this may have been a communal meeting place for ritual events, although you've got to remember the normal social activities such as trade, alliances, marriages, successions, etc. They may also have been carried out here as well. Perhaps made more important or confirmed by the ritual acts. Although given the lack of domestic evidence on the actual site, this area seems to be set aside for some specific ritual purposes. Okay, so ritual events are a great way of integrating groups of people, particularly in times of change and uncertainty. So the act of sacrificing items of value and meaning to the community, such as coins, metalwork, as well as to individuals, so the pigs, can be used to evoke a communal loss and sacrifice. The loss makes the gift more valuable and therefore more likely to be taken notice of by the various gods. Whatever gods they were worshipping, it seems likely that the offering of coins and metalwork and pigs, along with feasting, may well have served to unite a community at the time of great change, so i.e. the Roman invasion. We do think the main activity, that's the deposition of the coin hoards and the helmet, happened over quite a short period of time, perhaps 20 years. So we're looking at something like an annual event, and might well reflect the anxieties of British tribes leading up to and immediately after the Roman invasion of Britain in AD 43. Okay, so interestingly, work on the treasure site has also allowed us to look at other archaeology in the wider area. So this is a digital elevation model of the area with the darker brown areas and red areas representing higher land, and the green representing the valleys. The pink dot you can see there is the shrine, and for reference, the black dot is Hallaton Church in the village. And you can see that the shrine is sat in a really prominent position on the ridge looking out over the Welland Valley. Now, the red dot there is a site that the Hallaton Fieldwork Group has been looking at for several years now at a place called Hairpie Bank. And this is a very different type of site. So this is excavations over the past few years which have discovered a medieval chapel, the Chapel of St. Morel. And one of the strange things found here is a cemetery with lots of rather unusual burials. And here are a couple of them. You can see an adult male on the left who's been killed by a blow to the head from a poleaxe or war hammer, suggesting he was killed in battle and then brought here for burial. And the one on the right is a young male, and we think the strange position he's buried in is due to some kind of wasting disease. We've also got several children buried here, and many of the bodies were weighted down with stones. Now, this site is 1,500 years later in date than the Iron Age shrine. So why am I talking about it? Well, isotope analysis has suggested that none of the burials are from the Hallaton area, that they came from all over the country, including possibly the continent. And the suggestion is that St Morell's Chapel is a site of pilgrimage, in the sense of travelling to a sacred place to ask for favours or absolve yourself for your sins. There is a perfectly good church in the village, so why were people being buried here? Was it because there were pilgrims coming to Hallaton to be healed? And if so, was this perhaps based on the knowledge passed down through history that this was a traditional special place? Thinking back to our Iron Age shrine, we have a sacred place, the offering of coins, metalwork, Roman helmet, and of course the slaughtering of pigs and possible feasting. This is a place where 2,000 years ago people would have gathered, possibly at specific times, to ask their gods for favours. People are likely to have gathered from all over the area, travelling some quite significant distances, and essentially the shrine was a place of pilgrimage for the Iron Age people of the East Midlands. Once there, they did all the things a traditional pilgrim would do, gave offerings to the gods, asked for favours, and carried out specific rituals. So was this knowledge of this area passed down to the medieval period? We know that Christians often tried to Christianise pagan sites, what they considered pagan sites. So was this chapel an attempt to commemorate an area known as a special ritual site, a place of pilgrimage and healing, but turn it into a specifically Christian healing site? And in another twist, Harepipe Bank, as well as being the location of a pilgrim chapel, is also the starting point for the traditional bottle kicking and hairpie scramble, held at Hallaton every Easter. This is one of these strange traditions whose origins are lost in time, but again, I don't think this is coincidence that this particular area is being used for a gathering of people to come together to carry out strange rituals in the modern period. You know, is this a case of local memory preserving the knowledge of this particular ridge being a special area and being used over and over again for people to come together as a community? Last year, the Hallaton group started looking at this field here, which is in between the treasure site and the shrine and St Morell's Chapel. So it's actually a known post mill, so you can quite clearly see the mound of the post mill there. But when we started digging, unexpectedly, we found Roman archaeology, showing that the Roman activity we saw on the treasure site and also on St Morell's Chapel site spreads right the way across that ridge. We also found 2 skeletons buried here. Now, at the moment, we don't know what date they are, whether they're Iron Age, Roman or medieval, but hopefully at some point we will be back on the site to do some more excavation and add more information to the story. So, just to sum up, that although this talk has been predominantly about the Iron Age shrine, potentially this area has been a special place for communal gatherings and ritual for several thousand years, starting with possible burials with the round mound seen on the geophysical survey that could be a Bronze Age round mound, the Iron Age shrine, Roman activity across the area, possibly some ritual activity as well, a medieval pilgrim site, and finally the modern day traditional gathering for the bottle kicking. And I'm going to finish with some pictures of the Hallaton Fieldwork Group, because throughout the various years that this project has been running, we really wouldn't have been able to do an awful lot of this work without their help and support. They've been involved in nearly everything that I've been talking about. And it's really thanks to them that an awful lot of this information has come to light. And that's the end of my talk.